just like that, right on cue. We have E4 on the board, Maurice.
Yeah, we'll see just how this goes. There's going to be some sharp games. We got 90 minutes of serious chess that's going to get played here. And this E5, the advanced variation in the carry, looks like the only thing people do these days in order to compete in this line for white. And it just gets super sharp. So hold on to your seats because this is going to turn into fun. Already we see a C5 pawn, temporary pawn sacrifice, and a check, of course, recovering. And white has some good dark squares in the position right now. You see that D4 square is something that he's going to try to pivot against. But black has a very solid position. Super solid structure right now. Super solid. You're going to have to make some pawn breaks to break through. No way in the world you're going to break black's position down with just piece moves, as black's going to have easy piece plays. Knight's going to come into the game. C6, E7 most likely, and also castles.
Yeah, and we talk about this structure a lot, whether it's in the French or the Caro, the difference between the bishop being outside or in. So black has fixed the big problem of the big pawn stuck behind the light squares, but in exchange, maybe white gets a little bit of an initiative, as you highlighted. The dark squares are being gripped, and this 5-minute portion sometimes in these matches give us a little bit of insight into whatever prep was put in. Sometimes we learn that a player kind of going out of their way to play something different. Sometimes a player showing maybe like Wesley is here. I mean, he's used a total of 7 seconds that he knew Nodirbek was going to play the Caro-Kann, and he's ready to play quickly. So we'll see if that continues to be a theme.
And this move, knight, very natural, knight BC6, took quite some time for him to play. And the problem was this next move, bishop to E3, he had to be ready, as he could tell that Wesley was ready to go into an endgame with the two bishops. And Wesley's playing instantaneously. Clearly, he's analyzed this position.
Yeah, and we'll see when the first moment comes. You see more than a minute on the clock already. And if this continues to be a theme, you start to wonder how much prep Wesley put into this Caro-Kann. Nodirbek now on the clock. I assume knight c6 is going to be the move, but is knight c4 the other idea?
He'd rather play knight c4 and get rid of one of the bishops so that he doesn't have to compete against two bishops. That's preferable, and it looks like what he did. But that bishop on b6 was annoying, and that's why you see this retreating move, knight to e7, looking to get to the d5 square. If he cements this knight on d5, I don't know what Wesley's playing for. I mean, you notice that Wesley still played a4 instantly. This is going to be one of those unbalanced endgames. You'll have a centralized knight, which is normally what you want when you're competing against the better minor piece, I guess, of the bishop, so to speak. Dr. Evil quotation fingers. But the dark squares, I mean, I think Nodirbek has done pretty good in the first stage, especially given that Wesley was playing so fast, showing some prep. Absolutely, and I don't care about the dark squares. If I could put my king on c6, that's the real key. If that king could fly to c6 instantly, get your bishop, and this is the problem. This rook a4 move is preventing this key idea of putting a king to c6 and solidifying the position. And the other thing that white's going to want to do is somehow get his other rook to gang up on this pawn. So you might see an h4, h5. You might see a king e2, rook to okay, so now Wesley's played bishop d4. He's X'd that idea completely, or at least for now, putting his bishop on a square where it cannot be traded. And now he's going to look to see if he can take some time, maybe drop a king on e4. And then we got to wonder exactly how he's going to pressure that c-pawn. Because, again, real good control in the position on the light squares for black.
Super interesting because both players' control can become their weakness, right? The c-pawn and the knight are down on the light squares, and you wonder if white could somehow get a second attacker here. This a-pawn makes the b-pawn backward, but I don't know anything about these positions as a player other than in a fantasy world, maybe I could even get my rook to the 4th rank and move the bishop or something. I don't be curious to see. Oh, here we go. I was just sitting there wondering, what's the deep plan that white has to try to make this strength a weakness?
It's about that c-pawn, and frankly I didn't perceive it as a strength in my eyes because it does look like it's weak. It's there. It looks like it's constraining white, but white is not constrained at all, really, by this pawn. The key, though, is how is black going to get counterplay? Now black is realizing that there is a challenge to this pawn on the square, on the c4 square, but the pawn on e5 is also potentially a weakness as well. But how does he get his rook? He needs like 3 moves: rook to h5, rook F5 without hanging the pawn on H4, and then G5, and then he's set. Then but it takes so much time to pull that off, and he's trying to figure it out now. And look at his clock ticking down dramatically. He's played Rook H5, but he's lost a lot of time trying to figure it out.
Yeah, this will be interesting, Maurice. I'm already just thinking, I wonder if we'll see both players go back to this, because if this becomes one of those sort of theoretical struggles, not a Berlin endgame, but some sort of endgame where both sides feel like white feels, I do have enough to play for a small edge and win, and black is like, I'll hold this all day and keep going. This will be interesting to see if they repeat this.
But it's critical. Oh, it's critical right now. The C pawn is indeed hanging at the moment, because even though it looks like white will lose the E pawn, the H pawn is hanging. So how do you solve that? Do you feel like maybe this is a drawish ending? You go into a major single rook ending with everything traded off. So what I'm saying is white's threatening to trade, and there he goes. This is the thing I was saying. Would he be able to play rook F5 and potentially G5 at a moment when the tactics work out? Because he's going to have to take on E3, and it looks like he has worked this out timing-wise perfectly. He is now ready to take on E3 if you take his H pawn, and pawn takes allows rook F2 check, and king takes allows rook takes E5 with check. So his timing was spot on.
Let's analyze that. We'll bring up the board to show the line that Maurice is thinking about in his head. If something like this occurs, everybody, Maurice's point is you take here first. And if you take with the pawn, there's rook F2. And if you take with the king, you win with check, so that then you have time to protect the H pawn, right? Regardless of where this king might go. It might be with G5 or with the rook or some other kind of counterplay. In fact, A5 also hanging, right?
So A5 is hanging as well.
So that's the line Maurice is.
Perfectly timed. Perfect. I had described this entire variation that's what black wanted with G5, but I didn't know if he could execute it. But with that bishop sitting on E3, that was the key. That had not happened yet. But the bishop sitting on E3, then everything works. But the reality is that the bishop on D4, nothing threatens black. So white had to do something, and that pure defense, I mean precision defense by the youngster, and he's got Wesley so now in a deep tank. Remember that big edge he had on the clock? It's gone. It's gone.
Chess is hard, right? Man, don't you wish you could move your bishop and do your advantage without giving them counterplay? I hate that part of chess.
Good luck with that. And now the king shifts, is trying to guard the F2 square, but it does seem as though G5 is possible, but he decided not to even bother, because now that he's taken, he can show that he's got some play. And here comes G5, and we're seeing a lot of pieces get snapped off. And I felt like G5 was the right timing move, because now you're dropping the C pawn. He didn't play G5. Maybe there was something wrong with it, but now the C pawn is dead to the world, and black's going to have to find counterplay some other way.
Yeah, let's back up to that position Maurice was talking about real quick on the analysis board. Maurice's idea was G5 instead of rook C5 to hold F4. And I think you were right, and the computer agrees with you ever so slightly, Maurice, so heads up. The whole point Maurice is saying is you can play rook C5 next, and if white takes now, you still have this pawn. So perhaps Nodirbek missed a slight inaccuracy, because if this position holds out, it looks like Wesley's going to go up a pawn, as indeed he's about to. So interesting, yeah.
And now instead of taking, he's played this move, intriguing move, rook to E5. His threat is to play F7 and then take on E6. Yeah. That's what he wants.
Let me show that line real quick. If a move like rook A2 is played, F7, and you take with check, and then you can even slide over here.
And time to collect. That's exactly right. That would be the precise variation that black is calculating right now. He realizes that the danger is on, and I don't even see what he could do to stop this idea. I mean, trading rooks is terrible. Your rook's hanging. Maybe B5 and pray for this endgame to be okay for you. This looks gnarly.
One of the ideas I just realized is if the rook moves or if B5, I was just going to say, I wonder if F5 is coming first, because if you take now, F7 is lights out. Here comes a queen.
This is hard to defend now. F5 was indeed a monster threat, and it looks like it's going to be bad. He's just dropped big material. This is resigns. Just play F7 and it should be all over. I don't see any reason to play this position any further. This is bustido. Wow, it's just a big turnaround in this position, and you got a big problem. Your rook is frozen. Your rook cannot move off of F1 because of rook to F5. Move your rook away, rook F5, and lights out.
And it's over.
You just can't. You can't stop what's going to happen. So
this is an idle threat, as they say.
That's
false
an idle
prophet.
threat.
You can't move it anyway.
E6, keep going. And Wesley has played a quiet move and waited around for a second. It doesn't matter because you have no moves. Your king cannot move because of E7. This check does nothing. He should be able to just – I don't see why he's not playing king b6 instantly.
I think he'll play rook f6. Oh, wow. No, he's got a weird move, b4.
Rook f6 didn't threaten anything. This is
only
a hope. And why can't we take this pawn? I'm still confused. Why can't I just take this pawn and smile? What's the problem?
Nodirbek made that move with 0.3 seconds on the clock. So regardless of on the board, on the clock is how this one will